in the concerts we heard many contemporary compositions too. After all of this, as a composer, do you feel now free from the folk and baroque music traditions? Yes or no, but how and why you feel so free or not? What will be your musical home?
Being free from something or being free to do something, are they the same thing? This recalls a reflection that I recently made while reading Zygmunt Bauman's Liquid Modernity, which was an eye-opening moment in my life. So actually I have to thank Thomas von Wachenfeld, docent von Wachenfeld, sorry, for recommending the book to me, because that was a compendium of all the concepts that I later understood I had been throwing into my own research. When Bauman talks about being free in liquid modernity, we might actually discuss this concept later, but in a nutshell, one thing is being free to do something. So we are, in our modern days, we are enjoying a very high degree of freedom to study, freedom to travel, and so on. But what are we free from? So I'm going to answer your question, I swear, but I just want to take long circles before I do it. The increased amount of freedom also brought an increased amount of individuality, I think, in our modern times, which means that we might also be freer from our neighbors, from our other fellow human beings. This is interesting because we're living in times when we're seemingly all connected, but are we really? So before I digress too much, I was actually riding my bus on this very morning to come here, and everybody, of course, we were all strangers on the bus, right? But everybody was either chatting with somebody on their phones or listening to music. They were isolated. I wasn't, because I don't have an internet connection outside my house. So I was watching the scene and realizing that being connected on that level doesn't necessarily mean that I'm connected with strangers when I meet them. So going back to your question, what am I free from and what am I free to do? So I guess the last part of the question regards what am I free to do now, what I want, what my next temporary musical homes will be like. In the first place, I have a couple of commissions that I should probably think about from tomorrow onwards. But in terms of style, of finding my own identity, I just carry on the line that was suggested by Maestro Virta Perco during the feedback from the first concert. I should write as much as possible my own material. It's like the Antonio Machado poem suggested, we make our own way as we walk. So as much as I walk as a composer, no matter if I'm still reticent in using this term, refer to me, but I am embracing this right now. So I am going to write more, to conceive more music, and to bring it back to the performance level, which has largely been neglected in the last, at least in the last couple of years, also for pandemic reasons. So this is just to answer your question from the freedom to do something sort of perspective. What am I free from? So what is my relationship with folk and baroque music, for example, going to be? I think I want to recuperate once again the performative side of this relationship. On a compositional level, I think I've reached a space where I know that I like musical genres, but that's not where I dwell. The whole concept between that title is to make the in-between space the actual ground for composition. So there is a way in those intersections where if you really magnify the image, you don't really know what is what anymore, which is which anymore. And this may be a slightly romanticized view of scientific observation, but bear with me. This is also my maybe idealized, but actually very, very practical also way to go about composing music. So the answer to this question is I don't know. So I don't know, meaning not that I'm not informed about what I would like to do, but in terms of I would like to carry on this way, because for me it's inevitable as a person in the first place. I am a crossroads person. I think we all are in some way. We are crossroads of our own history or histories, our past, our present, the people that we meet, the cultures that we are exposed to, the music that we hear. And as composers, maybe Maestro Virta Perko can actually interact with me on that. We are constantly navigating this field of possibilities, especially now in the internet era. I can easily, click on my mouse and listen to Mattias Eklund or Meshuggah or Perutinus or Shostakovich or Maestro Virta Perko or any other composer very easily. How does this influence my music making? It does in a way that on a very deep level, and articulating my thoughts in this writing, in this written thesis, forced me to understand what I was doing and what I want to do now, which is still create ever new crossroads with other types of music maybe. There's a lot still to discover, just to be a bit more practical, a bit more specific in my answer, regarding, for example, Swedish and Norwegian music. I mean, this instrument is just unbelievably rich in repertoire. Every time I listen to something, I find myself, oh man, I should really, spend my whole lifetime on this Stringar, or I should go to Sweden and work with Mats Edén. I have had the luxury of collaborating with all these great musicians and people. Mats Edén, Peter Spirsky, Arto Järvela in Finland, Vegard Vårdal in Norway, and so on. I would like to collaborate a bit more, because this has been a rather lonely trip. I hope this answers partly your question.
Very much.
I have some observations of Stringar string quartet and possibly a question also. But as a composer, I'm interested in how the larger forms, how the continuum of music, how it functions, and how well it goes on, and the drama aspect of music. And your harmonic language is very plain. It's not the major issue in your in Stringar or Norwegian suits. And so you have chosen a kind of modal approach, which is I understand it very clearly because your emphasis is on rhythm and meter, and the way you create dissonances and conflicts and tensions in music. In Stringar, it seems to be purely on rhythmical and metrical ground. So you put motives together and make rhythmical dissonance and metric dissonance with these choices, and that's basically your main method of drama, of creating drama in music, and so it works well to a certain extent. You are able to. You certainly are a man of development and transition. You like to develop your material. You like to sort of go deeper to your material, and I do appreciate that. But at the same time, when the harmonic elements are very, like, should I say, tame or very easy listening, they are like soft cloud which embraces you. I find that the rhythmical treatment might not provide enough drama, and that's one thing I'm slightly puzzled. And the other issue is that when you declared yourself your intention to write a major work in the field of classical music, the string quartet plus 20-minute piece, which means that the individual movements are long, and so the way you create a long line, like a continuum of one single work, when you are relying on rhythmical development and the rhythmical kind of dissonance treatment, it brings you to a certain point, but as you are not dealing with harmony, like functional harmony, there are hints of you do chord progressions, and harmony is certainly an element there, but you don't use it like deliberately, and you don't aim to use it as a major tool for creating the drama in your music. So to my ears and eyes, occasionally it gives the impression that when you have developed one theme or musical idea to the extent that you can bring it, so then you are kind of you don't have enough compositional tools to create a smooth transition to the different thing, and I sense the desire of doing so, that you really want it to have a kind of organic identity, but I think the lack of compositional tools, and I'm not referring to the skill level, but exactly the tools that you have in the world you have chosen might not be sufficient. And it puzzled me a lot why I did like so much about the Norwegian suite and why I didn't like so much about Stringar, and it was only after reading your profound thesis that I realized that the role of rhythm, you say very little about harmony at all, and I do understand it, because in order for rhythmical complexities to flourish and to be distinguished and greatly observed, you need other space. There shouldn't be too much information, and I appreciate very much that idea. But still I feel that your choice of choosing a very soft harmony, like bourgeois dream, in very violent and energetic and lively rhythmical ideas, it's a kind of contradictionary starting point, which creates kind of questions about the identity of the work. So I would like to ask, firstly, do you recognize these issues? And secondly, how do you feel that the choice of your harmonic language, or were you satisfied with the result in the case of Stringar, especially the movements 1 and 3?
The answer to the first question is yes, and the second answer is not really, not yet. So I totally recognize those issues, and you framed it perfectly. I don't have enough compositional tools to go that direction. For example, I see that my teacher Eero Hämeenniemi is here in the hall today, and I think we've discussed the possibility to go in other directions, apart from the rhythmical issues, but in terms of my musical thought, the way I develop things, the way I transition things, and the way I construct the form. I build the overall form of a piece, not only of a piece, but as you very well mentioned, the entire quartet, for example, the entire suite or whatever it is. So in order to construct something, a musical home, but with a plan, with a credible sort of form that gives it stability, even if it's temporary. So absolutely. Speaking about harmony, yes, I am still searching for my own language. This is probably in my top 3 things to develop and study. And actually, going for 1 second back to Dr. Kontio's question regarding what my relation with folk sort of composition is going to be in the future, I want to take a break from modality, from sheer modality, because this is the basis for my harmonic, let's call it, language, for both for Stringar and for the Norwegian suite. Especially for Stringar, I chose to, even if I didn't have to, because a quartet is a quartet. I mean, the string quartet is made of violins and cellos and the viola. So there's no limitations to what you can do. And if you're using that instrument, especially in the tunings that I used, you are a bit limited in your harmonic choices, also because of the resonance strings. In the case of Stringar, I did have the choice. Obviously, I'm stating the obvious here. I decided to stick to a modality, to a very, very simple treatment of harmony, because this is how the original tunes, the original sound world that I started from was speaking to me. And once again, as you mentioned, just to stay focused on the rhythmical aspect. So, yes, I am aware of those issues. I think I should focus on those, especially on the harmonic and on the formal issues that you underlined. And am I satisfied about the results that I see in both the Stringar? You mentioned the first and third movement of Stringar. Or
yes, because in the second movement you're flirting
suite?
with expressional tools of contemporary art music. That's a different issue.
Yeah.
We might talk about that in a dinner.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, even talking about, we talked about this during the feedbacks and also outside the feedbacks, the circular form, it's a very comfortable and nice way to end a piece, and I completely, honestly, openly admit it. I espoused this method because it simply worked, and it worked well in that case. In other pieces, actually in the first movement of the quartet, it's not really circular, is it? Or in the second movement, it's not. In some ways it is circular, in some other ways it's just like this continuous progression that actually ends banging the forehead on the wall. But yes, formally speaking, I need to find a way where at least these three aspects, so the construction of the piece, the harmonic language, and the rhythmical aspect, well, let's add the melody on top of it, or any aspect communicates to each other. Writing folk-inspired music, for the time being, due to my own compositional lack of tools, limited me a bit. So I listened to a lot of folk-inspired art music compositions, even from Nordic composers, contemporary or modern, and I was really, really admiring the level of bravery that they took in rethinking the folk through their own harmonic language, but they had developed a language anyways. Or I'm thinking of Szymanowski, for example, Harnasi, the ballet that made him famous as a folk-inspired composer, somebody who lived and studied the Polish traditions, which then he transformed into this half-an-hour ballet that he wrote. And that for me was really, really a revelatory moment, because the harmonies and the formal aspect is so tight, is so coherent. The road is long, the crossroads are all over the place, so these are excellent suggestions and they confirm my own view of myself. So, long story short, regarding Stringar, I am satisfied, but I think I would like to go much further than that. I would like to explore more how much I can, maybe even push the boundaries of the harmonic language of a musical tradition, and see what happens. I was really tame. You are absolutely right. I was consciously so, because I wanted to really learn how to speak polymetrically. And this aspect, I think, in my humble opinion, is definitely something that I can take for granted in the piece, in Stringar, and also in the Norwegian suite. That is a bit more of a question of originality, because in the Norwegian suite, especially in the second and fourth movement, I use a lot of formulaic motifs that call for special rhythms, that call for special harmonies, and they need to stay there if I want to use them in their originality. So that's my comment. Thank you.
You mentioned that it was necessary for you as a method to compose these early folk baroque suites, and that you found actually your own way to how to compose music at the Crossroads. I was wondering what kind of effect your written work as a method had on your composing. You devoted quite a large portion of the thesis actually to analyze the metrical features and to analyze what kind of building blocks are there in the traditions you are using and so on. So how did this affect your composing, or have you seen yet the effect?
I think it affected the composition very deeply. Before even thinking about writing a string quartet or writing a suite for Hardingfele solo, I remember spending several weeks, maybe several months, in the summer of 2019, I think, yes, listening to a lot of material, both traditional material from Norway and art music inspired by Norwegian folk material. And at the same time reading, for example, Mats Johansson's thesis and all the literature that I found online and in this institution. And it deepened my knowledge, needless to say. So I was learning a new language. I was getting into the grammar of that language by means of theoretical literature written on that language. That was not enough. So I tried to embody the language by trying to speak it myself on the fiddle, especially for the Hardanger fiddle suite. That wasn't enough, of course, so I started listening and watching and asking people. So in this way I interdisciplinarily try to approach the necessary knowledge for the composition. How did it affect the actual notes that I wrote? Well, it's a potentially endless, bottomless discussion here, because every composer it's impossible to analyze to the finest detail how much your influences get into the actual sounds that you produce. But you can, of course, shed some light. Those theoretical essays, for example, deeply influenced the second movement of Stringar, so Telespringar. Telespringars are maybe the most and maybe still to a certain extent are the most foreign types of Stringar and most flexible types of Stringar that I encountered in the Norwegian Hardingfele tradition. And knowing how they work, how the idea of inferred meter was really enlightening. Knowing, and then going, thanks to this hermeneutical spiral sort of process where you zoom in and out of a picture, you have two polarities. So there's myself and the Telespringars, for example. I zoom into the Telespringars and then I understand that there's an ambiguity in meter, but what is meter then? So I go back somewhere else, the spiral is circulating, and I explore another area, which then redirects me to yet another area. So this constant spool, spinning of knowledge is what sparked many ideas in the piece. The same form, the same sequence of events that unfolds throughout the piece is largely the musical depiction of what I was reading in Mats Johansson's thesis, the concept of rhythmic reshaping, for example, the concept of rhythmic tolerance, this fantastic idea that he reports, quoting Ann Danielsen, Norwegian musicologist, who is persuaded that beat is not a point in time. We are normally, this is very typical of people who are used to a very, very strict and precise musical notation. We are bound to the idea that beat has an onset, and that's it. There's a line and there's a beat. According to Ann Danielsen, it's not exactly like that, especially in the field of folk music, where the melodic instruments are also the rhythm carriers. Because if I play my fiddle, there is a myriad of parameters that carry out the rhythm, that bring out the rhythm, as we all know. There's accentuation, the way I use the bow, the way I ornament, even the way I move, everything concurs to the same creation of, to the same performance of the meter. And that's not even the end of it, because then the meter has to be inferred by the listener. So I try to convey all of these ideas in one piece, and that's just one example. We can change the piece and talk about the Norwegian suite, for example. Reading this mammoth publication that Morten Levy wrote, The World of Gorlaus Slots, in 3 or 4 volumes, like some thousands of pages. And Gorlaus Slots are the basic material for nearly the whole of the Norwegian suite. Reading almost all of the books by Levy, and also inquiring in many other directions, told me that there are constituent principles in the construction of these tunes. So once again, I was learning a new language. I was learning Setesdalska, the language that they speak, the Viking language that they speak in Setesdal in Norway. And that was difficult, but I had pre-exposed myself to that. Once again, by getting into the fine grains of the language that I was exposed to and that I wanted to learn, gave me an idea of how I could use these structures to speak my own version of it. And my own version of it is partly the Ramesrots sort of tune construction, a motif that is repeated and then germinates into something else, that then is repeated and then germinates into something else, and so on and so forth. So something that grows organically within itself. That, for example, and the concept, the character of a Lyarslott or a Huldreslott, or the myth of the Nyckeln, which deeply informs the narrative behind the second movement of the suite. All of this, of course, whenever is sedimented in my own musical being, and then I speak on behalf of that part of me, pulls everything that is not immediately belonging to that area with them, though. Because I am one person, I'm not several musical characters. There's all of me when I play the suite, when I used to play my folk baroque experiments or my folk baroque arrangements and so on. So it's a gathered knowledge that as researchers we amass when we study a phenomenon, and that the great thing about artistic research is that you eventually translate that into your own language. And this is how I am still trying to trace my own paths in the field of grass that surrounds me all the time. But thanks for your question.
Yes, there was something very interesting in your lection. You mentioned about mind, using mind to categorize music, and then you spoke about freedom, answering Sinikka. So-called freedom we have so much share in the Western worlds nowadays, and the individuality, that is not true individuality. We don't meet people anymore, really. We don't have a connection. And then what you write in your thesis in the last part 6, where I am, and actually you are talking about this belonging or individual connection with people. And so now we have been hearing so much about rhythm meter theory and melodies, and so I want to talk about spiritual things. Because this was very touching when I was reading about this, how you felt very welcome to the folk music communities, meeting people, and you felt welcome to join the dance and play for the dance and jam and so on. And I think that is the true essence of folk music. It's a connection between people. And you mentioned in your writing essential thing, living bodies of knowledge. You saw people living bodies of knowledge, and in my world, maybe you are aware of this concept of wisdom in human being in 3 parts, that we have wisdom of mind, wisdom of body, and wisdom of heart. And I very much felt that reading this, how you felt that you were welcome into the circle of folk musicians, then you decided to stay out and pop in and pop out, not to be a tourist stealing the musical ideas, but you still didn't want to go in there. And I think there is, and you said that you were afraid of losing your identity somehow if you jump into this fully. It sounded really funny to me because I don't think that your identity is something that is stationary and it's only built on history of yourself. But your identity is an evolving thing. And if you feel the urge to experience the folk music fully, there is nothing to be afraid. But what I'm curious is, you also mentioned seeing people dancing, and you had the sight of people dancing on the floor, and the difference between the insiders and me was the sense of belonging. And to me, this belonging to something, it includes all the mind, physics and heart. And it also affects my experience of art. If it's only affecting my mind, I don't really too much get influenced by it. It should go to heart, and also if I feel it in my body, then it's really exciting. And today in your lecture, when I saw the pieces of the music you have written, I noticed when I felt the urge to dance. When there was the first Polska part, then my body was invited to move, and I totally enjoyed the music with all of my wisdom. And my question actually is that, have you allowed yourself to go into folk music situations as dancer, dancing along, and are you aware of this, that your body can carry actually the right position of the beat? You were talking about this preciseness of the beat, but actually your body knows once you have let your body to teach you. Very unclear.
No, not at all, not at all. You touched upon so many very, very relevant points. Let's start from the last one. If there's, well, let's put it that way, one of the limitations that I see in my research is the lack of dancing, precisely, for practical reasons and for my own personal reasons. So I'm not what you would call a natural dancer. What is a natural dancer anyway? So I haven't really been having that as a part of my normal life. So it still takes quite a bit of courage for me to, move my body to the sound of any music. If it's music that has more or less conventions, so you go to a Polska lesson and it's a lesson, so you're taught how a series of movements that you might or might not use. I've done that. Not enough, not even remotely enough, but I've done that enough to understand that it wasn't enough. Going deep, as you say, deep into folk dance and even folk playing, which maybe it's even the same thing,
Yes.
On some level. This is something. This is one more thing to add to my list of things to do when I grow up. Something that has been perhaps overlooked during my stay in Sweden, for example, for once again another set of reasons. But it is true that the bodily knowledge, the body wisdom, I like your tripartite view of human wisdom. The wisdom that the body can do is essential, definitely. Otherwise, I become a disembodied, incomplete being. And since folk music is largely based on that, hopefully it's the unity of these three aspects that you mentioned. Maybe this was also why I didn't feel that sense of belonging, because I neglected the more immediate, even physical aspect of music making, or folk dance and music making. So thanks for reminding me of that. Regarding all the other points you raised, I wasn't really, maybe I expressed myself not so clearly in the thesis, but I wasn't really afraid that I might lose my identity if I stepped into the circle. I was merely asking myself, what happens if one is a foreigner or an outsider in any circumstance and is invited nevertheless to go in and quote-unquote integrate themselves into the new environment? What happens? I was merely asking myself the question. I don't have an answer now because I would need to go deeper into folk music in Finland or Norway or wherever I am. I know, for example, what it means to dig down into early music because that's where I come from, or classical music, or Italian food or Indian food, because that's my exposure as a human being. I've had that for a long time. So I wasn't really afraid. Fear is not even a question, of course. On the contrary, I was very, very enticed. I was really, really attracted to make the final decision and say, okay, I really sit down many, many hours every week or every day, and I try to embody this knowledge with my own playing on dancing. Please.
A short comment, because now I feel that you act like a missionary, that you are coming outside and seeing the great folk music, and you want to spread it to your fellow musicians outside of this genre. And maybe this is funny thought, but just I toss it out.
That's a very, very...
Yes, let me finish. That I thought that, okay, if you would be fully into folk music, then your baroque music friends would think, oh, he's one of the believers, don't listen to him. You need to be outsider to be creditable person widely, not only inside of your own genre.
Yeah, that's also my position. I have no idea whether I would or have become a missionary of anything, to be honest. I think it's exactly what you said about knowing what's inside the circle, and then when you step outside and you communicate with the outer world, make sure that there's still a connection to that original world. So what I mean in my thesis when I talk about stepping in inside and outside the folk music circles is that we can see that there's two polarities, okay, two possible approaches if you're an outsider to folk music. Maybe you become like Daniel Sandien Warg, a Swedish person who has literally transplanted himself into Setesdal, and now he speaks the language fluently. He's a believer, quote unquote. He's a tradition bearer, they say. So it is possible, and in that case, you find yourself really speaking naturally with that type of idiom. It's funny though that somebody who's clearly a tradition bearer, like Knut Hamre, this legendary fiddler, that's also quoted in my text, how he perceives himself at a very specific moment in folk music transition or even performance, where he diminishes and the music grows. This might be once again an idealized and romanticized version of it, but I think knowing Knut, he's very, very sincere in saying that he becomes a nothing. And I've always liked this quote from his from the book that Benedicte Mauset wrote, based on the conversations that she had with him. There is a moment for him when he performs folk music or he teaches folk music, where he becomes irrelevant. Like we can think of a drop of water that meets the ocean, and in that moment when the drop of ocean is fused with the rest of the water, it kind of loses its identity, but then it regains its new identity back from the ocean itself. It's part of a bigger drop, so to speak. So that's one polarity, one extreme approach to folk music, in my opinion. The other is musical tourism, as you mentioned. So you go to a place, you take a few pictures, and then you go back home, wherever your home is. Now, where do I stand? Of course, needless to say, somewhere in the middle. And I think I go back and forth hermeneutically, once again, back and forth between the two polarities, because I think that is my mission, if anything, or my aesthetics, my perception of myself. I am able to connect worlds, maybe that more than becoming a true expert of a specific field. And along the process, and also thanks to you, my guides through the artistic process, I've learned that this is my strength, if anything. This is my territory. This is where I can develop some sort of artistic identity. You mentioned the freedom of the mind of the listener in relation to the genre categorization, and I think also related to that, you mentioned the virtual connectedness that nowadays we have with each other, which is a good thing, but also not such a good thing if it goes to the detriment of the actual, should I say, physical or in-person sort of contact, what Zygmunt Bauman defines as offline life. We have an online life and we have an offline life nowadays. And it's that connection that, if it becomes an interaction, also quoting Bauman, it becomes the tool for a better society and for a better understanding of the differences. For me, navigating between musical tourism and tradition bearing is always a matter of how do I see myself, how do I position myself in relation to the different, the cultural other, the Norwegian folk music tradition, or the Finnish yohiko music, or anything else, even Indian rhythms, whatever we're talking about. And the answer is that of civility, a beautiful term that Bauman suggests in his book. And so we can look at it that way. We stand our ground, and there's differences. There's this otherness that we encounter. We have the choice of maybe acknowledging the differences, but then acting as they were not existing. So we kind of jump over them. And we're all humans. We're all equal. So it doesn't matter if we are different. I think it does matter if we are different, and it's actually fantastic if we're different. So what I normally term the globalistic attitudes to differences is one that basically nullifies differences on the grounds that, since we are all humans and there's no ground to fight with each other, then everything is equal, everything is the same. And this is very well depicted by, potentially at least, by the age of internet, where everything is impalpable and not really localized, not really embodied in the old ways. I have a certain age, so I'm maybe old-fashioned. So back to civility. The other option, on the contrary, is that I acknowledge the difference between myself and the other, and the cultural other, but I explore them, I question them, and I let myself be questioned by them. In other words, I establish a dialogue with the different. It's the longer road, it's the harder work. It takes a lot of time and energy and courage. It's probably also bound to fail at some stage, and then you renegotiate, but at least you are on that path. This is what I learned in the very last phases of my research, when I was almost forced by these lovely guides that I had to reflect upon what I was doing. And this is why I'm so passionate in keeping quoting this Bauman and new kind of liquid frame of mind when living, applying that to my own music making related to musical traditions. So when civility is in place, I think, when it has been in place for me at least, concerning my relation with the folk traditions that I explored, I think the dialogue was fruitful. I learned something, and I assumed something also of myself was communicated through the other. Otherwise, I just assimilate. Either I push away anthropoemic attitude, or I eat, assimilate, absorb, and digest the other in order to make it as myself, another copy of myself. Anthropophagic sort of approach. In the middle, I think there is this idea of civility, or quoting actually Dr. Thompson here, intercultural interaction, intercultural humility. Am I right? Thank you. So it's the same, for me it's the same concept of being engaged as much as possible without hierarchy or dominance. Just, we are here for the same purpose, and let's see what happens. Hope it doesn't sound too vague to you.
Thank you, very thorough answer. I'm very happy. Thank you.
I tend to digress a lot, I'm very sorry about that.
So, dear Krishna, you are going to be, by doing the doctoral kind of degree and thesis and all these tests of proficiency, you are becoming a kind of expert of hybridity as well. And I would like to ask you, do you have any example where you think that, or what kind of features you find related to hybridity that, or in the genre, that would be compromising or inconvincing artistically or ethically? Or can you give us an example where you would think that, okay, well, this is somehow unsettling, or that you feel squeamish about that?
Yes, I think so. I can take some examples from my own experience as an observer more than anybody who participated in those experiments. I can give you two orders of examples. One is taken from our common field, Baroque music. So as you very well know, I guess everybody knows, there has been a tendency in the last couple of decades on behalf of Baroque musicians to look somewhere else for sources of inspiration, for example, towards folk music. I know quite a few people who try to incorporate folk music elements, especially from Ireland and Scotland, but also from Poland or from other much more distant traditions, like Middle Eastern, or people who experiments who've been in where the crossover happened between Baroque and jazz, between Baroque and gospel. So it's, I don't want to sound too blunt, but it's kind of trendy these days. Nothing wrong with that, once again. It depends on how you do it. And more often than not, speaking specifically about the mixture between folk elements and Baroque elements, I witnessed a certain lack of knowledge of the folk element. The same term, folk Baroque, which I very guiltily used myself, even in my own master's thesis. I say that openly. I don't like this term anymore. Because in the first place, if you think about it, there is an underlying assumption that as a Baroque musician, you're folk Baroque. So you're first folk and then Baroque. No. You're still, at least speaking for myself, I was still largely standing my Baroque ground and then incorporating folk elements. So it should be Baroque folk, to be quite honest. But this is maybe just pedantry on behalf of a hopefully soon to be doctoral person. But nevertheless, this is one very revealing detail of the mentality that sometimes I encountered. The other side of the coin is that more often than not, especially with my own group, Brew, we've been very well received in the Baroque music world, but as something exotic, which is once again can be nice, but it kind of belittles the amount of work that you put into that thing. I'm speaking about my own example, but there's heaps of people, even here in this very hall, and they know who they are, who have been trying to join the two forces with a lot of work, and being asked and being considered the I'm going to be politically very incorrect here. Being considered the folk musician that then can, play outside in the open air. Doesn't matter if it rains, but if you're a baroque musician, then you've got to have a church, and you need to be treated with all respects. This is not where I want to be, and I've seen that happen, sadly. On another, a rather different aspect, I was referring earlier to the very intriguing world of global music, and I myself am a graduate of the global music degree, which is something that probably was one of the most life-changing experiences in my life. Yet I see that the danger with the approach to differences, as we were commenting a minute ago, is the globalism. For me, any ism entails a little bit of activity. It becomes a system, it becomes a sort of an ideology. And once again, there's nothing inherently wrong with the ideologies, but in this case, I find that the result that we're witnessing also in our non-musical life is that of, it doesn't really matter, everything is the same, so we just smile to each other and don't really smile and, we just smile. It's better than, pushing the other way, of course. But I wonder whether the mixture of different elements, on which level it happens, how much of the intercultural humility is really enhanced and encouraged. For example, there was one instance ages ago at a music festival in one Nordic country where I was working as a volunteer, and one of the projects, it wasn't my own project, I was the contact person for artists, but not for those artists. So one of the highlights of the festival was putting together musicians, like it was maybe 4 or 5 people coming from different musical genres and places in the world. So they were put together in 3-4 days, and that was it. So make music. Of course, they came up with something that in the end was fantastic, because their musicianship is just incredible. The instruments that they played were incredible, and to some extent they really managed to have a dialogue with each other. But what can you do in 3 days? It takes a lot of work. I'm not saying that I myself am the missionary or the proof that it works. On the contrary, I'm still pretty much in the middle of the field. By no means I want to judge or preach anything, but I have the strong feeling that if we're not careful, we will incur in this problem. Differences are so, I'm talking about, of course, positive differences, like qualities, let's say, are so beautiful. And variety is so typical of our age, and I think that's the playground. That's where we need to start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is kind of a sports question after a ball game or cross-country competition or something, but according to this neat little thoughtful poem you used in the beginning of the thesis by Machado, the footsteps are drawn for you, but are there any footsteps that you in retrospect regret haven't taken, and if so, what would you have done different in this journey that probably ends today?
How much time do you have? I am notoriously somebody who ruminates about the past quite a lot, and I shall try to be as succinct as possible. Yes, there are more than regrets, things that I learned from, very many and very much. Some of them have already been mentioned. For example, the approach to dance that I felt was a bit more needed in my case. One more thing that I forgot to comment upon, I think it was Dr. Kyhala maybe that mentioned it. Anyways, the blending of the performing and the composing aspect. So as my supervisors know very well, I am quite reticent in seeing myself as a performer, despite the fact that yes, I have recorded my own music. I had no other choice for practical reasons, but it was a nice discovery. I know I can do it. So this is also something that I would have liked to experiment more with. Maybe to the expense of the amount of time that I spent investigating musicological aspects of the research, or maybe thanks to a better time and energy and resource managing. But yeah, secondly speaking, more of the composer-performer figure, which was also so normal in Baroque times. And we kind of lost it along the way, and I think we should all work to bring it back if we can. That's the second thing. And there is something about the order of my concerts that was due to technical reasons, but is not quite right. I would have preferred to have the third concert in the first place, so the more musicological exploration of the roots of the Polska, and then the exploration of the different countries. And there was something else, yes, improvisation. So talking about the improvisatory aspect of folk music making, that's something that was very briefly touched in the first concert, and that was abandoned. So that's also something I could have done a bit more. Also continuing on the artistic side, I think, not to repeat the same thing that we said with Maestro Virta Perko once again, but I do regret not writing more music of my own. I could easily have devoted the time that I spent writing the Swedish suite in Baroque style by writing one more of my own pieces. But I discovered that later. Maybe it was still necessary in the process, I don't know, but I completely agree with Maestro Virta Perko when he said that folk Baroque experiments, period composing, as is termed by Bruce Haynes in The End of Early Music, to me it makes sense in a way. It made sense at the beginning of my artistic process, but it very soon ceased to have any meaning. And still I perpetuated that for an entire term. So that's maybe one of the biggest regrets that I have. I'm trying to think if there's anything on the merely research side of my project that I could have done better. Yeah, that's quite a few things. Especially, okay, this is quite a thick book. There's a lot of pictures, there's a lot of scores, so all in all, the number of words is not so intimidating. It took a long time to write it and to conceive it, but it could have started earlier. So I started writing the thesis and reflecting upon what I was doing, so making cognitive what was intuitive, quite late in my research. And that is the reason why, for example, I didn't really dig into Bauman's philosophy until you suggested it, or I didn't really learn about the many implications of the Werktreue, the artwork problem in classical music, before Dr. Vehviläinen once suggested me that I read Liederger's The Imaginary Museum of Musical Works. It wasn't until I had to do it, I forced myself into it almost, that I read that folk and art music are in fact categories that were created not by the folk, by the way, at all. So they came into the intellectual discussion much, reasonably recently, honestly. All of these things need time to be elaborated, to be articulated in your own understanding, and they need time to be unpacked. And I feel like right now, in many of these respects, especially in the intersections, in the discourse about liquid modernity, in the discourse about the interconnectedness of the fields of culture, I'm still a newcomer. So there's a lot to explore, and it's the excuse to prepare this very defense has become a highly interesting moment for me to explore these directions, and I feel like I want to do more in that direction, if possible. So the project ends today, but also starts today in a way, with your help.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Krishna,
Yes.
I was very fascinated about your plan and idea of traveling to Poland.
Yeah, that's another thing I
Between.
regret, by the way. Yeah.
And now I have a little question, and you can
Yeah.
answer yes or no, and I have a hope about the answer, but I don't say it. And also, are you still one day going to travel to Poland to research the Polska roots?
That's my hope. Dr. Conti refers to the fact that in my very original plan, I had in mind to go to Poland on a field trip, because I have contacts in the folk music scene there, and also in the musicological scene, people who have studied the Polish style, both on art music and on a folk music perspective. And I wanted to go there and learn the music and do a field trip. I think the need for it is slightly lessened these days, because during my research I read literature that is just about that, and there is hardly any research gap that I can cover there, right, on a purely theoretical level. Because you mentioned to investigate the origins of the Polska. I think that's done. There's still a lot of debate, but that's not my area of expertise. I'm not, unless I want to turn into a musicologist, maybe that's not exactly what I want to do. But still, the other aspect, so the embodiment of that, is probably going to happen. It has happened to some extent in the past years, because I had the luxury to play in Warsaw every summer at a festival with a baroque group from Italy. And every time I make sure, even next August I'm going there, so every time I make sure that I visit some folk music concerts, both with my own friends and random folk music concerts, because there's quite a lively scene in Warsaw. And even going there and watching people dance and trying to figure out how they navigate those rhythms. And those rhythms are wild, are really, really, really incredibly, even more complex than what I learned on that fiddle. So the desire to know more about that is definitely there. Maybe next August I will make sure that I stay some extra days to dig more into that. So thanks for reminding me of that.
Also, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Quick comments.
Yeah.
Rhythms are difficult as long as you are using your mind to understand
Yes.
the rhythms. As long as you start to listen to your wisdom of your body, they
Exactly.
become natural.
It would be ideal to join. Yeah. It would be ideal to. We're all trying to, be as wholesome as possible, and even more than that, to be holistic. So the sum of the part is larger than the part than themselves. The result is larger than that. But yes, an ideal bridge between the wisdom of the mind, the wisdom of the body, and the wisdom of the heart. And I think there's even more levels we can examine. I think that's a good thing to aim for in life and in cultural production especially. So thanks for the comment.
I have another question.
Yes.
Is there, you had this certain problem with the fourth concert and Vegar Vårdal. Is there something you learned about this? What was the main reasons, and have you analyzed later on what were the real reasons for the conflict?
Yes. There's many lessons that I've learned from that experience. Probably the biggest lesson is that piece is difficult to play. So whenever when I had to play my own music, my own piece, a piece that I didn't write having myself in mind, even if I was largely writing the piece with my instrument in my hands, in that moment I learned that stylistically it's strangely difficult even for me. Technically it is. It's hard to keep it together as a whole. So yeah, I have a lot of respect for people who, like Vega, took the trouble to try and realize something that's not that wasn't immediately in his own area of expertise. So he took a huge leap in doing what he did. So I'm very grateful for that. I guess the most valuable lesson I learned was I think it was very, very well framed by a comment that Professor Ilmonen had uttered during the feedback after the last concert. She said that it became clear to her when I was playing the last movement of the suite, because I had to do it at the concert live. It became clear to her what that music really meant, so that the idiom with which the piece was being communicated to the audience was a lot clearer. And my music deserved me as a performer. I'm probably sort of translating what you said, but I think that was the overall sense of your statement. And that was surprisingly difficult for me to accept, because I still have problems in acknowledging the fact that I can play my own music. So that's maybe the biggest lesson that I learned. And throughout the very intense process of preparation of the recording, so while I was practicing the piece, I don't think I've ever practiced anything as much as I practiced my own suite. I understood my music better. So what does it tell me? It tells me that, once again, composing music is fine, and being just a composer, of course, is fine, especially if you're writing for orchestras. You can't really play all the instruments. But if you're writing for solo instruments, and if you have the luxury of being a performer and a composer, maybe you should take into consideration joining the two aspects more often, because, as folk musicians tell us all the time, there's nobody who, like the actual source of the knowledge, to disseminate the knowledge, probably. I don't know if you will agree on that. I mean, you're more entitled to express your opinion, since you're more folk musicians than I am.
I might just comment on the whole issue, that it's actually very interesting to place yourself as a composer in this position of Crossroads. You can kind of say that, okay, I'm kind of in between these influences and these traditions, but what actually happens when you start doing it? There a lot happens. I mean, this discussion with Olli and you about the kind of dominance of the metric things and the rhythmic things, and the simplicity of harmony, which comes directly from the Polska tradition and the folk music tradition, where the melody is the king, the harmony is not so important. So how far can you stretch that actually without becoming something else totally? And where is the liminality? What are the borders of the liminality when you are actually in between traditions? One other aspect, I think, was the danceability, which I kind of started wondering when we saw here the orchestrated suits. I mean, that kind of early music, classical music, it's also very danceable, but in a very different way than folk music. So I was wondering, is it possible to live in the same moment these two traditions of, let's say, the danceability of folk music or Polska, which is very, very grounded, kind of horizontal, very like gazon, sitke, stretchy, and kind of stretchy and physical, with a lot of pelvis involved, and the classical danceability with a lot of horizontal. I feel it very horizontal, very, very kind of limb driven and mind driven danceability. Very different characters, of danceabilities. What happens if you try to compose in between these? Can you incorporate both of them, or does one override the other? And I feel it's the same issue here with the danceability and with the harmony versus other musical materials. If you take on something else, it kind of eats up something else. Definitely, you can't have everything. How do you deal with this situation?
I probably don't. No, but jokes apart, I have a couple of points. For example, you mentioned the question that I also uttered in my lecture: how far can we stretch a musical item? For example, a folk music element. How far can we stretch its boundaries before it becomes something else? But right now, I argue: is there a break point? Where is that, or isn't it like a Schrödinger breakpoint? So it's there, but it isn't really. I don't really know, because it seems to me that, of course, if you take into account the starting point and the end point of something that breaks, like a line that's broken, you have the, for example, the long, the short 1, 2, 3 pattern, okay, in Polska dancing. And if you stretch the 2 long enough, or if you inflate one of the other beats of the bar, you end up at a certain point having the other type of asymmetry. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and so on. But these are the extremes. I don't really know where we can place the slider, like the border between the two. But this is a very special case. In general, of course, since we are dealing with approximations, there should be break points. And why not? I mean, then it becomes something else, and it might be actually very interesting to see what happens, what it becomes after being a folk element that's been contaminated, to use Bartok's terminology, and then it goes on to becoming something else, like in the fantastic Escher drawing that I mentioned. The second very, very short thing is maybe your idea of lightness, of almost to the point of being disembodied, of Baroque music is our own fault. Because I don't know if Dr. Kartonen agrees with me, but there is an element of intellectualism in the way we approach early music that should probably be integrated with a bit more of what you call being, you use terms like
pelvis.
Ground.
Yes, grounded. Thank you very much. Grounded. It's dance. Of course, it's more formalized. It's another type of aesthetic, but I think they do have something very earthy and very common.
Yeah. And isn't it so that it's also up to the listener who is interpreting how we hear material? Yeah. I hear it like this, but the other person might hear it very differently.
Yeah. So I mean, to answer your question, I think that should be probably realized at the level of the performance more than on the composition. Also because it's difficult to join a style that's, well, dead. Baroque people are sadly no more with us, and the style that they had is of course still present, but in my opinion it's not. It's still too anachronistic to me now that I have gone through the process to reenact yet another folk Baroque experiment. So I think it's more of a question, for me, will be more of a question of how I embody those different styles in a more grounded way when I perform, or when I perform my own arrangements or my own pre-existing folk Baroque literature, I think.
So, On the grounds of the thesis and the discussion heard today, we, me and Asi, propose that the thesis is accepted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Music.
On the grounds of the statements and the discussion heard today, the Artistic Committee proposes that the artistic demonstration of proficiency is accepted in partial fulfillment of the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Music.
Esteemed Thesis Examiners and Artistic Committee, I am deeply honored to receive your approval and acceptation of my doctoral degree and to be included in the community of musical doctors. My own footsteps might have brought me here today, but they were wisely and kindly guided by your advice from the very beginning of this life-changing process up to the present day. For this, I am thankful more than formal words can tell. Thank you very much.